The hallway was quiet, save for the faint echo of Lena's shoes on the worn wooden floorboards. Every step toward Sophie's bedroom felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself was mourning, holding its breath in anticipation of her presence, or rather, her absence. Lena's hand lingered on the doorknob, cold metal against her palm, as though it were a fragile bridge between memory and reality. The funeral had ended hours ago, yet the ache in her chest refused to lighten. Threading her thoughts with ghostly images of Sophie's laughter, her whispered secrets, and now, the unnatural silence that replaced them. When Lena pushed the door open, the room appeared untouched, suspended in time. Sophie's bed was neatly made, a small lavender plush bear tucked against the pillow as though waiting for her return. Posters of indie bands and hand-painted art decorated the walls. Snapshots of a life that had been vibrant and fleeting. The window curtains swayed slightly in the late afternoon breeze, letting in thin slats of golden light that glanced across the floorboards and the neatly arranged belongings that now seemed like relics. Lena stepped inside cautiously, her fingers grazing the edge of Sophie's desk. It was immaculate, the notebooks stacked with meticulous care, pens aligned in perfect symmetry. She could almost hear Sophie's soft humming as she wrote, a private ritual that had now been silenced. Grief hit her anew, a raw, suffocating weight pressing against her chest. She closed her eyes, inhaling the faint scent of lavender that clung stubbornly to the sheets. A ghost of Sophie's presence, she began tidying, picking up a scarf that had slipped onto the floor, refolding it as if the act could restore normalcy. Yet the room resisted her efforts. Something was off. Small irregularities gnawed at her awareness. A slight tilt of a photo frame. A chair pulled an inch out of alignment. A shadow behind the curtain that didn't quite belong. Lena paused, a shiver crawling along her spine, her eyes drawn to the corner of the room near the bookshelf. There, glinting faintly in the streak of sunlight, was something small. Metallic dot. Her heart beat faster. What? What is that? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She bent closer, reaching toward the object with hesitant fingers. It was a tiny pin, cold and hard, unlike anything she remembered Sophie owning. Yet the curiosity that pressed against her fear compelled her to inspect it. She picked it up, turning it in her hand, and a flash of movement caught her eye from the corner of the room, a subtle reflection on the glass of a bookshelf. Lena froze. Grief and confusion collided in her chest, making it hard to breathe. This room, frozen in time as it was, held secrets she hadn't anticipated. Her mind raced through memories of Sophie, late-night phone calls that ended abruptly, a furrowed brow over schoolwork, occasional quiet moments that Sophie had brushed off with a laugh. Could there have been signs she missed? A premonition of something darker than she had imagined? She moved toward the bookshelf, her footsteps deliberate, each one echoing softly in the empty room. The glint grew brighter, revealing the edge of something embedded behind a row of books. Lena's fingers hesitated as they touched it, cold, hard, out of place. It felt deliberate, hidden, almost as if it were meant to remain unseen. Her mind recoiled. Why would her daughter's room contain something hidden, secretive? Questions multiplied, swirling in the heavy air. Who? What? Why? The grief that had felt like a static weight in her chest, now twisted with a sharper, insidious sense of unease. Lena backed away slightly, taking in the room again, this time with a cautious eye for other anomalies. The lavender bear seemed to stare up at her with innocent eyes, yet the juxtaposition of its softness against the hard glint of the metallic object made the air feel colder, more sinister. She tried to focus on mundane tasks, folding clothes, straightening books, but her hands shook. Every movement felt amplified, every sound in the room echoing with a hollow resonance. As if the walls themselves whispered secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. Her attention was drawn next to Sophie's desk, where a half-finished journal lay open. Lena knelt, brushing her fingers over the pages. Words scrawled in familiar, youthful handwriting described ordinary teenage life at first school. Friends, music, but there were subtle shifts, expressions of fear, mentions of someone watching or lurking, fragments of unease that Lena had never noticed before. She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing as she traced the words with trembling fingertips. Sophie had been trying to tell her something, hiding her distress beneath layers of normalcy. Lena's stomach churned with the cruel irony. Signs were there, yet she had missed them, too blinded by love and routine to see the darkness that crept into her daughter's life. The afternoon light waned, shadows stretching long and menacing across the floor. Lena rose slowly, glancing back toward the corner again, drawn inexplicably to the metallic glint. Something about its deliberate concealment disturbed her, a seed of suspicion planted deep in her heart. She knew, with a cold certainty, that Sophie's death was not the end of the story. The room, so meticulously maintained, felt alive with unspoken truths, and Lena realized she could no longer simply grieve. She needed to uncover what had been hidden. As she stepped toward the door, her eyes lingered one final time on the bed, Sophie's bed, and Lena felt a surge of resolve. Mingled with dread, the room held secrets that demanded discovery, and she could no longer ignore them. The metallic object, small and inconspicuous as it seemed, would be the first clue. She closed the door softly behind her, the faint click echoing like a heartbeat. In the silent house, Lena took a deep breath, her mind racing with questions that had no answers yet. Somewhere, beyond the grief, beyond the tears, lay the truth of what had happened to Sophie, and Lena knew, with an instinct as sharp as fear itself, that she had no choice but to follow it. No matter how dark the path might become, the quiet of the house pressed against her ears as she walked away. Yet the room seemed to linger in her vision, its stillness almost mocking in its perfection. Shadows gathered in corners, subtle and waiting, while Lena's mind spun with a mixture of dread and determination. The first step toward uncovering Sophie's hidden life had begun. Lena's fingers lingered on the edge of the bookshelf, cold and unyielding, as if testing her resolve. The metallic glint she had seen yesterday now revealed its true form, a small, inconspicuous camera wedged between a stack of Sophie's notebooks and a row of dog-eared novels. Its black lens stared blankly into the room, motionless yet somehow alive with menace. Lena recoiled, the object heavier in her hand than it appeared, as though it carried the weight of unseen eyes and unspeakable truths. Her heart pounded. "Why?" she whispered, voice barely audible. "Why would you hide this, Sophie?" The words echoed faintly off the walls, swallowed by the stillness of the room. The grief she had carried yesterday now tangled with something darker, unease, suspicion, and fear. This small device, silent and unassuming, hinted at a reality she hadn't been prepared to confront. She held it close, examining it with trembling hands. Dust clung to the edges, faint fingerprints smeared across its casing. The lens reflected the room's muted light, glinting like a black eye staring back at her. Lena realized that the camera was not just an object. It was a witness, a silent recorder of moments that might have been private, painful, or even dangerous. The thought made her stomach twist, a cold shiver running from her neck down her spine. The impulse to put it down and retreat warred with a growing need to know. Lena's mind flashed through memories of Sophie, the late-night whispers on the phone, sudden disappearances from her own room, hints of worry hidden behind forced smiles. Could this camera hold answers? Or would it reveal horrors Lena wasn't ready to see? She set the camera on the desk, heart hammering against her ribs, and exhaled shakly. In that tense silence, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Lena fumbled for it, her fingers trembling. It was a text from Maya, Sophie's closest friend. "Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up?" Lena stared at the message, unsure if she should respond. Finally, she typed a quick reply, her thumbs hovering over the screen as she hesitated. "It's hard. Can we talk?" Within seconds, the phone rang. Lena answered immediately, needing someone, anyone, to anchor her. Maya. Lena's voice broke mid-word, a fragile thread of emotion trembling through it. Lena, hi, Maya said, softly, her tone cautious. I didn't know whether to call. I wanted to check on you. How are you holding up? Lena closed her eyes, swallowing back the lump in her throat. I found something, she murmured, glancing at the camera on the desk. A camera. Behind Sophie's bookshelf. I don't know what it is. I haven't opened it yet. There was a pause on the other end. Lena could hear Maya's quick intake of breath. A camera. Are you sure? Yes, Lena whispered, almost inaudibly. I don't know if I should look at it. I'm scared, Maya. Scared of what I might see. And scared of not seeing anything at all. Maya's voice softened, a gentle anchor in Lena's storm. Take your time. Don't do anything you're not ready for. But, if you think it might help you understand, maybe you should. Lena nodded, though Maya couldn't see her. I know, I don't know if I can face it yet. Her hand unconsciously drifted back to the camera, brushing the cold metal casing. What if it's something horrible? I'll be here, Maya said quietly. You don't have to do this alone. The words offered Lena a thin, fragile thread of comfort. She ended the call, but kept Maya's voice lingering in her mind. The camera sat there, quiet, indifferent to her fear, yet pulsing with a silent promise of revelation. Lena's grief, raw and ragged, now intertwined with something darker, a sense of lurking truth she could neither ignore nor fully understand. Hours passed as Lena paced the room, eyeing the camera with a mix of dread and resolve. Shadows lengthened across the floor, stretching like dark fingers toward her feet, while the afternoon sun dimmed behind heavy clouds. She imagined Sophie in the moments the camera had captured, moments that were hers alone, now frozen in time, and observed through a lens she hadn't known existed. The thought was unbearable. Finally, Lena touched the camera again, fingertips brushing the cold metal. She imagined pressing the play button, the world narrowing to a single frame, a single moment of revelation. Her pulse quickened, and a shiver ran down her spine, crawling beneath her skin. She wanted to look. She knew she had to know, yet terror rooted her in place. Her daughter's absence was already a wound too deep to bear, and the idea of uncovering a hidden truth threatened to shatter her further. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer, as Lena circled the desk, eyeing every corner, every shelf, every object. Something about the camera felt alive, as though Sophie's presence lingered in the lens, silently urging her to confront what she had hidden. Lena shivered, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her, heavy and accusing. With trembling hands, she lifted the camera once more, turning it over as if examining it for clues. The memory card slot peeked from its side, a small door that promised answers or nightmares. Lena's chest tightened as conflicting emotions surged. Fear, sorrow, suspicion, and the faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps, somehow, the truth might provide solace or justice. She placed it carefully back on the desk, unwilling to confront it fully yet. The camera had become both a threat and a tether, a connection to her daughter that she could neither sever nor embrace completely. Lena knew that the next step would require courage she wasn't certain she possessed, a willingness to peer into shadows she had spent a lifetime avoiding. And yet, deep down, a single insistent thought pulsed. She could not turn away. Sophie's life and the secrets that had preceded her death demanded discovery. Lena's grief hardened into a resolve that flickered in the dim light, fragile but unyielding. She stepped back, taking a deep, shaky breath, and for a moment, simply allowed herself to feel sorrow, fear, and the quiet, creeping sense of anticipation. The hidden camera sat there, still and waiting, its lens a silent, cold witness to truths she had yet to uncover. Lena knew that when she returned to it, she would cross a threshold she could never undo. The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, whispering of secrets yet to be revealed. Lena's hand brushed against the edge of the desk, the faint metallic glint of the camera catching her eye once more. The thought of watching the footage made her stomach knot, but the seed of determination had been planted. Somewhere in the grainy lens of that tiny device, Sophie's voice, her fear, and perhaps the first hints of the truth were waiting. Lena turned from the desk. Letting the camera remain in place for now, unresolved but impossible to ignore. She needed time, but not too much. The path ahead was dark, uncertain, and terrifying. And somewhere in that darkness, the next piece of Sophie's story waited, whispering for her to listen. The room was dim, the curtains drawn against the late afternoon light, but Lena's hands trembled too violently to notice. She set the small camera on the desk, its black lens staring at her like a silent judge. Her fingers hovered over the memory card slot, and for a moment, she felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what she was about to uncover. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to leave the room and pretend ignorance. But another part of her, the part desperate for answers, urged her forward. With a shaky breath, she connected the camera to her laptop. The device whirred softly, a mechanical sound that seemed louder in the heavy silence. Lena watched, every muscle taut, as the screen flickered to life. Grainy, distorted visuals appeared. The room bathed in static shadows. Lena's pulse quickened as she recognized Sophie instantly, slouched on her bed, hair falling messily over her face, eyes darting toward the door. Sophie's voice came first, soft, almost a whisper, trembling with unease. I don't know if he's watching me again, she said, glancing off camera toward a shadowed corner Lena couldn't see. Her fingers clutched at the blanket, knuckles white, nails digging into the fabric. Lena's chest tightened, the voice so familiar, so intimate, carried fear and vulnerability in a way no memory of Sophie had ever prepared her for. The camera shifted slightly, the grainy lens struggling to capture the room fully. Lena could see Sophie's movements, her restless pacing, the way she twisted her hair around her finger as if trying to anchor herself. Her whispered confessions spilled into the empty room. I can't do this anymore. He said he'd come back if I told anyone. The sentence faltered, drowned by a sharp intake of breath. A quiet sob. Lena's hands shook so violently she had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from toppling over. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself still, but tears ran unchecked down her cheeks. Her daughter, her vibrant, mischievous, stubbornly independent daughter, was reduced here to someone fragile, terrified, pleading to an invisible presence in the shadows. Lena's mind raced with questions. Who was watching her child, and why hadn't she known sooner? The camera lens caught subtle details that Lena had missed before, a faint scuff mark on the corner of the desk, a shoe print by the window, the way Sophie's eyes darted repeatedly toward the doorway as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. Each movement seemed deliberate, yet anxious, choreographed by fear. Lena's stomach twisted in knots, nausea curling through her chest. She had known Sophie struggled at times with school stress and friendships, but this was something else entirely, something darker, unseen, and malicious. Suddenly, Sophie's whisper grew sharper. I told him I'd tell if he came near me again. Please, just leave me alone. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and Lena could feel the desperation, the raw fear emanating through the screen. Lena's chest ached with guilt, every missed sign pressing down on her shoulders. Why hadn't she noticed? Why had her love, however constant, not been enough to shield Sophie from this shadow that now loomed so clearly? The screen flickered, the grainy video stuttering. A low hum from the camera sounded like a heartbeat in the quiet room. Lena's hands trembled uncontrollably as she watched Sophie glance at something just outside the frame, something Lena could not see. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. He's here, I can feel it. He's watching. The words sliced through Lena like a knife. She pressed her hands against her mouth, stifling a sob, and then a scream high-pitched, sharp, abrupt, the kind of scream that reverberates in the chest, leaving an echo of terror behind. Lena's stomach lurched, and she stumbled back from the desk, gripping the edge of the chair for support. The room felt colder, the shadows longer, creeping along the walls like dark fingers. Lena's mind raced, a chaotic storm of horror and disbelief. Sophie had been terrified, and Lena had never known. The video cut abruptly, the screen going black, leaving only the soft whir of the laptop fan. Lena sat frozen, staring at the blank screen, her breath ragged and uneven. Her hands, still shaking, hovered above the keyboard. Unable to move, the room felt charged with an unseen presence, as though Sophie's fear had seeped into the walls themselves. Lingering like smoke after a fire, Lena's thoughts spun uncontrollably. Why had Sophie hidden this? How long had this been happening? And the most terrible question, had this fear been the reason she died? The room, familiar and comforting only yesterday, now seemed sinister and unrecognizable. Every object, every shadow seemed alive with the memory of Sophie's terror. Lena's grief twisted into a sharp edge, slicing through her chest with each recollection of her daughter's smile, her laughter, her presence that now felt impossibly distant. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, trying to steady her shaking hands. Memories of Sophie flashed through her mind, curling up in the corner of the living room with a book. Late-night conversations where Sophie confided her teenage worries, the playful teasing over small arguments, all now tinged with tragedy, shadowed by the unseen threat revealed in the video. Lena's sorrow deepened, morphing into a combination of anger, guilt, and a desperate need for answers. The metallic camera, silent on the desk, seemed to hum with latent menace. Lena realized that this device had preserved moments she had never been able to witness in life, moments of fear, desperation, and perhaps, pleas for help. The revelation struck her with a sharp clarity. Sophie had carried a burden she couldn't share, and Lena had been oblivious. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her gaze lingered on the desk, on the small, unassuming camera that had become a vessel for both revelation and horror. Lena's grief, already raw, was now entwined with suspicion and fear. The screen's blankness felt like a promise, more footage, more truth, waiting for her to uncover. And somewhere, in that grainy, flickering frame, lay the key to understanding Sophie's final days. 2. Confronting the shadow that had haunted her child, Lena finally rose, pushing the chair back. With a soft scrape that echoed through the dim room, her fingers brushed over the camera once more, hesitant but resolute. The first frame had shown her Sophie's fear, raw and unfiltered, and it was only the beginning. There were more frames, more whispers, more pieces of the story she had no choice but to see. The room around her seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the journey she was about to undertake. One last glance at the bed, Sophie's bed, and Lena steeled herself. The truth was waiting, hidden in the grainy video, and she could no longer turn away. Each frame would reveal more, each whisper a step deeper into the shadow that had consumed her daughter's life. The next step was inevitable. Lena would watch the rest of the footage. She would confront the reality that had been hidden from her, piece by piece, and begin to untangle the threads of fear, manipulation, and betrayal that had led Sophie to her death. The path ahead was dark, but the first frame had set her on it, and there was no turning back. The day after watching the footage, Lena could not sleep. The shadows in the corners of her home felt sharper, closer, as though Sophie's fear had seeped into the walls themselves. Her grief, once a dull ache, had sharpened into something urgent, insistent, demanding action. She returned to Sophie's room, the camera still sitting silently on the desk, like a dark sentinel. Lena set it aside and turned her attention to what she knew she could still control. The fragments of Sophie's life she had once overlooked, now layered with secrets. She began with the laptop. Sophie's digital footprint, a labyrinth of teenage worlds, private chats, and hidden accounts. Passwords, old notes, bookmarked sites, each a doorway into Sophie's private thoughts. Lena felt a pang of guilt for not noticing sooner, for failing to ask the questions she now needed answered. Each login revealed another piece of a puzzle that Sophie had tried to keep hidden, a careful mosaic of fear, manipulation, and clandestine communications. The first discovery was subtle but unsettling. Private messages with a name she did not recognize, Ethan at first. Lena assumed it was just a school friend, a passing acquaintance. But the tone of the messages was different, persuasive, almost insistent, coaxing Sophie into secrecy, praising obedience, and offering reassurance that felt more like control than comfort. Lena's chest tightened. The familiarity of Sophie's handwriting carried a tone of unease she hadn't recognized before. A quiet cry woven between polite responses. Lena's hands shook as she scrolled further. Ethan's messages were carefully timed, almost omnipresent, and Lena began to sense a subtle manipulative thread, a power play disguised as affection. The more she read, the clearer it became. Sophie had been groomed, carefully coaxed into secrecy, and trapped in a psychological web she had never confessed to anyone. Lena's stomach churned with disbelief. How could a young girl, so full of life and intelligence, be ensnared by someone so cunning? The anger that rose inside her was fierce, mingling with grief to form a dangerous, burning resolve. Determined to understand the extent of Sophie's hidden life, Lena turned to the journals. The pages, filled with familiar loops of handwriting, initially seemed innocent, daily reflections, sketches, small poems, yet, as she read further, the tone shifted. Fear became more explicit, coded language that hinted at interactions she had never known, conversations that revealed coercion, subtle threats, and a constant anxiety that Sophie had tried to mask. Lena's eyes stung with tears as she read phrases like, "He says he'll be mad if I tell, and I feel watched even when I'm alone." The room grew colder as Lena traced the narrative across the pages, connecting dots that had always been hidden in plain sight. Sophie's life, previously ordinary to a grieving mother, now revealed a shadowed side, a young girl burdened by manipulation, isolation, and a fear she could not share. Lena's grief twisted anew, sharper this time, slicing into her heart with the cruel realization that Sophie had faced this alone. Determined for clarity, Lena contacted one of Sophie's closest friends, Maya, hoping to uncover what Sophie had confided to her peers. The phone call was hesitant, full of pauses and muted sorrow. "Maya," Lena said softly, her voice trembling. I found some things about Sophie. Messages, journals, things she never told me." There was a long silence before Maya answered, her tone careful. I didn't know she was being hurt like that. She didn't tell me everything." Lena pressed, her own anxiety rising. "Did she mention anyone in particular? Someone she trusted?" Maya hesitated, then spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "There was a guy, Ethan. She said he was different. Nice at first, but something about him scared her sometimes. She didn't want to worry anyone." Lena's heart pounded. The name confirmed the threads she had already begun to trace, a person whose charm hid menace, whose words had wrapped Sophie in fear. Lena could almost see him now, the easy smile, the friendly tone, the subtle pressure behind every seemingly casual message. Her stomach turned. Whoever Ethan was, he had invaded her daughter's life and left scars invisible until now. Hours passed as Lena combed through photos, school notes, and snippets of social media activity. Ethan appeared occasionally, always in the background of group pictures, always smiling, always seeming harmless. Lena's fingers trembled as she recognized the duality, the friendly, approachable exterior that masked something sinister. The contrast terrified her. Sophie's fear had been real, hidden behind smiles and forced normalcy, and Lena had only begun to grasp its depth. The more Lena uncovered, the more isolated she felt. Friends, teachers, acquaintances, each piece of information hinted at normalcy while concealing Sophie's terror. The digital world had become a web of control and manipulation, and Lena's daughter had been caught in its strands. The thought fueled a cold determination, a need to untangle the network that had ensnared Sophie and to expose the person responsible. Late into the evening, Lena returned to the journals one last time, reading over entries that described Sophie's anxious routines, her whispered fears, the obsessive checking of messages and doors. The words painted a portrait of a girl burdened by invisible surveillance. Her laughter masking tension, her smiles hiding terror. Lena felt a swell of sorrow and anger that coursed through her veins, sharp and insistent. She knew, with a clarity born of grief, that uncovering Ethan's role was only the first step. The shadows in Sophie's room lengthened as Lena reflected on the day's discoveries. The camera, still on the desk, seemed to glint in the muted lamplight, a silent witness to the unraveling of secrets. Lena realized the path ahead would be dark and dangerous, but she could not turn back. The pieces of Sophie's life, the messages, journals, and glimpses into her social world demanded attention, and Lena felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. Before leaving the room for the night, Lena paused by the desk. She glanced at the camera one last time, considering its quiet presence. It had already revealed a glimpse of Sophie's fear. The knowledge within it was a door she could not ignore. Lena exhaled slowly, steadying her trembling hands, and whispered softly, "I will find out what happened, Sophie. I promise." The room, dark and heavy with memory, seemed to acknowledge her vow. Lena could feel the gravity of the secret world her daughter had inhabited, a world shaped by fear, manipulation, and unseen eyes. The first threads had been uncovered, but the tapestry of Sophie's hidden life was far from complete. Lena knew she had crossed the first threshold into danger and truth, and the journey ahead would demand courage, patience, and unyielding determination. As Lena turned off the lamp and left Sophie's room, she carried with her the quiet knowledge that someone, somewhere, had exploited her daughter's trust. The name Ethan lingered in her mind, a shadow just out of reach, his charm and menace intertwined in a way that had cost Sophie everything. Lena's grief had become a driving force, a sharpened edge of purpose. She would uncover the full story, trace every interaction, and confront the person responsible for her daughter's suffering. And somewhere, beyond the journals and messages, beyond the camera's silent witness, the next pieces of Sophie's life waiting for Lena to uncover them, step by step, shadow by shadow. The hunt for truth had begun. The next morning, Lena returned to Sophie's room, the air still heavy with lingering grief. The curtains were drawn just enough to let in muted shafts of sunlight that sliced through dust motes like pale, trembling fingers. She placed Sophie's phone on the desk, hesitating before unlocking it. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the anticipation of what she might find. Each swipe, each message thread, felt like stepping into a shadowed corridor. The darker she went, the more she realized just how little she had known her daughter. The first few messages were mundane, group chats with friends, reminders about homework, a discussion about weekend plans. Lena scrolled slowly, careful not to rush, savoring each small, ordinary glimpse of Sophie's life. But then, buried among innocuous exchanges, she found them. Cryptic messages from unknown numbers, fragmented and threatening in tone. One simply read, "You know what happens if you tell anyone." Another, more insidious, "Do what I say, or you'll regret it." Lena's stomach twisted, a cold, twisting fear knotting in her chest. She traced the numbers to contact Sophie. Had never mentioned none were saved under real names, only initials, emojis, and subtle codes. Lena's hands shook as she pieced together a rough pattern, realizing these messages were not sporadic. They were systematic, calculated, and meant to control. Sophie's life had been monitored, guided, and manipulated from behind a carefully constructed veil. Lena's heart ached at the thought of her daughter living in constant, invisible pressure, forced to obey threats she could barely understand. Determined to uncover more, Lena began calling Sophie's friends. Some were reluctant to speak, nervous, and evasive, but one by one, pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Secrets whispered in hallways, small exchanges in corners of classrooms, invitations to private study sessions that never happened in the library. There were hints of subtle bullying, exclusion from group activities, and pressure that Lena could now see as a form of emotional manipulation. Sophie's daily routines had been carefully monitored and influenced, leaving her isolated despite being surrounded by peers. One conversation with Maya revealed a particularly chilling detail. "She tried to tell me something once," Maya whispered, voice trembling. But she laughed it off when I asked. She didn't want to make a big deal, but she was scared. I didn't know who to believe. Lena's throat tightened. The implication was clear. Sophie's fear had been real. Carefully hidden beneath smiles, jokes, and the act of normal teenage life, Lena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she pushed them back, channeling her grief into resolve. Lena's investigation extended beyond digital footprints. She walked through the school corridors Sophie had once traversed with laughter and casual ease. Lockers lined the walls like silent sentinels, and the hum of distant voices in empty hallways felt surreal, a faint echo of the world her daughter had inhabited. Lena could almost see Sophie weaving through the throng of students, her eyes alert, wary, balancing normality with the weight of secrets she carried alone. Lena pressed her hand against a locker door Sophie had used frequently, imagining the whispered exchanges that had gone unnoticed, the hidden pressures that had shaped her days. Back in Sophie's room, Lena continued her search. She sifted through notebooks, sticky notes, and scraps of paper tucked into drawers. Each revealed a fragment of Sophie's life. Doodles of anxious faces, hastily written lists, notes to herself about people and places to avoid. The room itself seemed to hum. With the residue of Sophie's fear, every object a reminder of the meticulous caution her daughter had maintained. Lena's grief was punctuated now by anger and determination, a burning need to trace the path of manipulation and expose the source. Among the messages and notes, Lena found one that made her pause, written on a small scrap of paper, partially hidden beneath Sophie's textbooks, were the words, "Trust no one. He watches." Her eyes widened. The handwriting was unmistakably Sophie's, small, neat, but with a tremor of fear in the lines. Lena's mind raced. The warning wasn't just a plea. It was a reflection of the psychological pressure that had dominated her daughter's final days. Someone Sophie had trusted had turned that trust into control, and Lena now knew the threads had to lead somewhere, to someone tangible. Lena leaned back in Sophie's chair, trying to steady her shaking hands. The weight of the revelations pressed down on her, heavy as lead. Emotional manipulation had kept Sophie silent, isolated, and fearful. The cryptic messages, the secret meetings, the whispered warnings, they were all pieces of a carefully constructed maze designed to trap a young girl. Lena's grief intertwined with fury. She could no longer simply mourn Sophie. She had to confront the reality of what had been done to her. Her gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where the small camera still rested silently. It had already revealed fragments of Sophie's fear, glimpses of whispered confessions, subtle anxiety, and paranoia. Lena realized the footage and the messages were pieces of the same puzzle. Whoever had orchestrated this had woven control through both physical and digital spaces, ensuring Sophie's isolation and terror. The pieces fit together in a pattern that was deliberate and chilling. The day waned, shadows stretching across the floor like dark fingers creeping across memory and time. Lena knew the next steps would require meticulous care. The school corridors, the hidden notes, the cryptic messages, each held clues that could lead to the manipulator, but Lena understood the danger of missteps. This was no ordinary investigation. She was tracing the trail of someone clever, patient, and emotionally predatory before leaving Sophie's room for the evening. Lena gathered the notes and phone, tucking them carefully into her bag. Her eyes lingered on the desk and the corner. Where the camera sat, every detail, every trace of Sophie's private struggles, had a role to play in the uncovering of truth. Lena exhaled slowly, drawing strength from grief and determination alike. She had uncovered whispers of lies, shadows of manipulation, and fragments of betrayal, but the person responsible remained unseen. Lurking beyond the edges of her vision, stepping into the hall, Lena paused and ran her fingers along the banister. The air felt heavy, dense with memory and sorrow, yet charged with a quiet insistence. Sophie's life had been infiltrated by someone dangerous, someone who had hidden behind charm, patience, and subtle coercion. Lena's resolve hardened. She would uncover this figure, trace every message, confront every manipulation, and ensure that Sophie's fear would no longer remain hidden in shadows. The whispered lies had begun to surface, and Lena knew that confronting them would be only the first step toward understanding, justice, and ultimately, closure. Somewhere in the cryptic messages, hidden meetings, and fragmented recollections lay the key to uncovering the manipulator who had stolen Sophie's peace of mind. Lena would follow each thread, no matter how dark, no matter how dangerous, until the truth emerged from the shadows. The late afternoon sun spilled weakly through the half-drawn curtains of Sophie's room, casting long distorted shadows across the floor. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched into fists, the weight of grief and suspicion pressing hard against her chest. The room felt smaller somehow, every object a silent witness to the tangled web of secrets she was uncovering. In front of her, Maya shifted uneasily, arms crossed, avoiding Lena's gaze. "Maya," Lena began, her voice low but tight with tension, "I need you to be honest with me. Did Sophie ever tell you anything? Anything about someone manipulating her? Someone making her scared?" Maya swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. I thought I did, but I didn't know everything," she admitted, voice trembling. "Sophie, she tried to brush things off, you know, she didn't want to worry anyone." Lena's chest tightened, anger prickling alongside sorrow. "Brush things off. Maya, she's gone. And now I find out she was afraid of someone who was controlling her life, and you were right there. You knew, didn't you?" Maya flinched, eyes darting toward the floor. "I didn't know how serious it was. I thought it was just typical teenage drama, you know." Her words were defensive, but Lena detected the tremor of guilt behind them. Typical teenage drama. Lena's voice rose, shaking with frustration. She was terrified, Maya. Every message, every hidden note. She was living in fear, and you pretended it was nothing. Her words hung in the air, heavy and accusing. Reverberating off the walls, Maya's lips quivered, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to betray her trust. I thought if I pushed, it would make it worse. I didn't know how to help her." Lena sank back onto the bed, closing her eyes briefly to steady her emotions. The anger and grief churned in her stomach, a storm that refused to calm. She had trusted Maya, counted on her as Sophie's confidant, and yet now, she couldn't tell if Maya had been protecting Sophie, or herself. The line between loyalty and betrayal felt impossibly blurred. "You need to tell me everything, Maya," Lena said finally, voice quieter but steely. "Every message, every strange meeting, every time Sophie tried to warn you. I need the truth, not excuses, not partial stories, the truth." Maya nodded, shivering. Okay, I'll tell you. But you have to understand, I was scared, too. There were things happening that I didn't. I couldn't explain, and then, there was Ethan." Lena's pulse spiked. She had suspected him, pieced together his presence from messages and journal notes, but hearing his name aloud made the threat tangible. "Ethan," she asked, tone sharp. "What did he do?" Maya hesitated, biting her lip, as though choosing each word carefully. "He was charming at first, funny, attentive. He made Sophie feel special. But then, things changed. Small things at first. He'd criticize her subtly, suggest she shouldn't tell anyone about certain things, and slowly, he isolated her, made her doubt her friends, her judgment. I should have done more, but I didn't know how to stop it." Lena's stomach churned with a mix of horror and fury. She realized that Sophie's manipulation was not just digital. It had been emotional, psychological, and persistent. Ethan's influence had extended into Sophie's inner circle, infecting trust with doubt, turning friends into unwitting participants in her isolation. Lena's hands shook as she processed the depth of this betrayal. "Do you understand, Maya?" Lena pressed, voice low but cutting. "Do you realize what he did to her? To my daughter?" Maya nodded, tears streaming now. "I do. I really do. And I feel awful. I didn't see it soon enough. I thought I could protect her, but I didn't. And now, her voice broke, fading into silence. Lena looked away, gripping the edge of Sophie's desk. She felt a pang of guilt herself. Had she missed warning signs? The small changes in Sophie's behavior, the anxiety, the secretive messages, had she been so caught up in daily life, in her own routines and grief, that she had failed to see the danger? The thought gnawed at her, twisting her grief into something sharper and more personal. "You're scared," Lena said quietly, almost to herself. More observation than accusation. And so was Sophie. But fear doesn't excuse inaction. Her words left a hollow echo in the dim room. Maya flinched, and Lena knew the truth had hit home, piercing layers of denial and guilt alike. The room seemed charged now, heavy with tension and grief. Lena's eyes lingered on Sophie's scattered notebooks, her phone, the camera that had revealed the first flickers of her daughter's fear. Every item was a testament to what had been hidden in plain sight. The betrayal was not only external, it had seeped into trust itself, twisting bonds she had assumed were unbreakable. Maya's voice broke the silence. "I want to help now," she whispered. "I can tell you things. Show you things I didn't before. I want Sophie's story to be known. I want to make it right." Lena's chest tightened. She wanted to believe her, to trust the sincerity behind the tears, but years of sorrow and betrayal had made her wary. "It's not about making it right," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's about understanding what happened, and finding who is responsible." Maya nodded, understanding the weight in Lena's words. "I'll help, I swear. Anything you need." For a moment, the room was quiet, heavy with the aftermath of confession and confrontation. Lena's grief still loomed large, but now it carried a sharp edge of resolve. No one was fully innocent. Sophie had carried secrets. Maya had hesitated. And somewhere, beyond the circle of friends, Ethan had orchestrated fear and manipulation with ruthless precision. Lena realized that uncovering the full truth would require patience, courage, and unflinching determination. She rose from the bed, pacing slowly, trying to calm the storm of emotions roiling within her. Shadows stretched across the floor, dark and elongated in the fading light, and Lena imagined them as echoes of Sophie's fear, lingering in every corner of the room. Every object, every note, every fragment of memory now felt charged with meaning. Each a piece of the puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. Before leaving Sophie's room, Lena paused at the desk, her hand brushing over the small camera that had first revealed the hidden fear in her daughter's life. It was silent, inert, yet somehow present, a witness to every secret, every betrayal, every whispered lie. Lena felt a quiet determination settle over her, a promise she had to herself. And to Sophie, the truth would be uncovered. The fractures in trust would be traced back to their source, and the shadows of manipulation would not remain unchallenged. As Lena stepped into the hallway, Maya following quietly behind, the weight of the day pressed heavily on her shoulders. She understood, more clearly than ever, that unraveling Sophie's story would demand confronting uncomfortable truths, questioning assumptions, and facing individuals whose actions had left indelible scars. The journey ahead was uncertain, dark, and fraught with emotional peril, but Lena had crossed the threshold. The fractures in trust had been revealed. The complexity of human behavior exposed. No one was entirely innocent, and yet no one was beyond redemption. Lena knew the next steps would involve tracing the manipulator directly, following the thread that led from whispered lies to real danger. And somewhere in the shadows, Ethan waited, a figure both charming and sinister, whose influence over Sophie had to be confronted and dismantled. The house was silent except for the low hum of the laptop. Perched on Sophie's desk, Lena sat before it, her hands trembling, the small camera connected and ready to reveal what she had feared yet dreaded. The shadows of the room pressed closer as dusk fell, the corners darkened by memory and grief. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Every instinct told her this would be unbearable, but the need for truth overrode fear. The first frames flickered to life, grainy and wavering, casting pale, flickering light across Lena's face. Sophie appeared immediately, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her hair messy, eyes wide and alert. The room in the footage was the same one Lena now sat in, a frozen echo of her daughter's private world. Lena's heart constricted. Seeing Sophie alive again, vulnerable and unaware of her mother watching, was both comforting and horrifying. The young girl's voice trembled as she spoke, the whisper sharp in the otherwise silent room. I can't tell anyone. He said he'd. The sentence ended in a shuddering breath. The figure of Ethan finally emerged, stepping just out of frame at first, his presence subtle, almost casual. He leaned against the doorframe, a smirk barely perceptible in the grainy footage, speaking softly yet firmly. It's better if no one knows, Sophie. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Lena's stomach turned. There was nothing playful in his tone. It was possessive, controlling, a predator cloaked in charm. The subtle menace in every word sent a chill crawling down her spine. Sophie's shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously toward the door, glancing at the camera, though it remained hidden. I don't want to upset anyone, she whispered, her voice barely audible, fragile. Lena's hands gripped the edges of the desk, knuckles white. As she watched her daughter shrink under the invisible weight of coercion, each frame revealed Ethan's psychological manipulation. The meticulous way he shaped Sophie's behavior, forcing obedience through fear masked as care. The conversation continued, the dialogue almost hypnotic in its subtle menace. Ethan's tone fluctuated between soothing and firm, an unsettling rhythm designed to unsettle and control. You'll see, Sophie. No one needs to know. It's just between us. Just a little secret, he murmured, tilting his head slightly. The motion, casual, yet deliberate. Sophie nodded, swallowing hard, her hands clutching the blanket. Lena's chest ached. She had thought her daughter's fear was abstract, a shadow in messages and journals. Now it was real, tangible in every grainy pixel. The camera caught the smallest details, the ones Lena might have overlooked if she hadn't been watching so intently. Ethan's hand brushed against Sophie's arm, seemingly benign, but the hesitation, the visible recoil from Sophie, betrayed the underlying coercion. Her eyes flicked toward the corner where the hidden camera now sat, and she muttered, He's watching, he'll know if I tell. Lena's stomach clenched with guilt. This wasn't just manipulation. It was domination. A predator exploiting trust and isolation to suffocate a young girl's autonomy. The footage shifted, revealing more interactions over weeks, moments Lena could hardly bear to watch. Ethan's tone was rarely loud, but always insistent, layered with subtle threats, encouragements twisted into coercion. Each recorded meeting exposed a pattern. Sophie's laughter, cautious and forced. Her reassurances to Ethan, brittle and uneasy. And the gradual erosion of her confidence. Lena felt a cold fury rise within her. The footage had stripped away illusions, leaving the stark, horrifying truth, bare. At one point, Sophie spoke directly to the camera, a hushed plea filled with dread. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't tell anyone. He'll come for me. Lena's hands shook violently. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to will the images away, but the whispers, the fear, the visible tension in her daughter's body would not be erased. She could feel Sophie's terror in her chest. A visceral ache mingled with rage. The recordings revealed subtle manipulations Lena had not anticipated. Ethan was not always overtly threatening. Sometimes, he worked through praise, small gifts, and compliments, each one a tether binding Sophie to him. You're smart. You're the only one who understands me, he said in one frame, his voice soft, yet insistent. Sophie's eyes, wide and anxious, flickered toward the camera. Lena's chest constricted. This was grooming in its most insidious form, trust entwined with fear, affection masked as control, leaving Sophie increasingly isolated and dependent. Lena's mind raced, trying to catalogue each interaction, each detail that might reveal a way to confront Ethan. The footage was a window into Sophie's final weeks, days filled with psychological tension, forced compliance, and hidden terror. Lena realized that the manipulation was comprehensive. Digital control through messages, social isolation among friends, and face-to-face intimidation carefully veiled beneath charm and apparent normality. It was horrifying to witness the precision with which Sophie had been trapped, her own hands now shaking uncontrollably. Lena leaned closer to the screen, straining to catch every whispered word, every subtle gesture. Ethan's smirk, the tilt of his head, the ease with which he coerced compliance, it all added to the tapestry of terror that had engulfed Sophie's life. Lena's resolve hardened. This evidence was not just for mourning. It was proof of manipulation, of coercion, of someone who had preyed on a vulnerable child and left indelible scars that could not be unseen. The recordings grew darker, showing Sophie trying to assert herself, a brief flicker of resistance in her eyes. "I don't want to do this anymore," she said in one clip, voice trembling but firm. Ethan's response was swift, almost predatory in its subtlety. A glance, a half smile, a tone of disappointment meant to crush her resolve. "Understand why this is necessary. Don't make it harder than it has to be," he murmured. Lena felt bile rise in her throat. The psychological domination was precise, meticulous, designed to break Sophie down without leaving obvious marks. As Lena watched, tears streamed down her face, mingling grief, horror, and growing determination. She could see the vulnerability her daughter had been forced to navigate, the fear that had stalked her every step, the careful orchestration of obedience and secrecy. Each frame revealed a piece of the puzzle, a map of coercion and abuse that pointed toward Ethan. Lena realized that these recordings were more than documentation. They were a roadmap to understanding, and eventually confronting, the person responsible. The final clip Lena watched that evening was the most harrowing. Sophie, hunched on the bed, whispered, "I can't tell anyone. He'll know." Ethan was partially out of frame, but the weight of his presence was palpable. Lena pressed her hands against her mouth, trying to stifle a scream, to quell the visceral terror that washed over her. She felt a spark of resolve ignite. This was no longer just evidence of fear. It was proof that someone had exploited, controlled, and ultimately destroyed her daughter's sense of safety. The camera's hum filled the room as Lena exhaled, wiping tears from her cheeks. Her hands trembled, but there was a clarity now, a hard edge of purpose. Ethan was not a name in a journal or a faceless threat in messages. He was real, present, and accountable. Lena knew that unearthing the full scope of his manipulations would require courage, patience, and meticulous planning. But the hidden truth, finally exposed, gave her the first tangible leverage to pursue justice. She shut the laptop carefully, lingering on the glow of the screen as the final shadows of day faded. The room seemed to exhale with her, heavy with the residue of grief and fear, but also charged with the first sparks of resolve. Lena had glimpsed the hidden world that had dominated Sophie's life, a world of coercion, emotional manipulation, and predation, and she would not look away. The truth was now her weapon, and she would wield it with unwavering focus. Lena stood, stretching her stiff muscles, and glanced once more at the corner, where the small camera rested silently. A witness to the darkest chapters of her daughter's life. The recordings had revealed Ethan's threatening presence and the psychological chains he had wrapped around Sophie, but they had also illuminated the path Lena must follow. Piece by piece, shadow by shadow, she would uncover the full story. The hidden truth was no longer hidden. Lena's grief had transformed into determination, her fear into action. She would track every interaction, confront every manipulation, and ensure that Sophie's story was finally told. And somewhere, beyond the screen, Ethan's true nature waited to be confronted. And Lena vowed she would not stop until justice was pursued, whatever the cost. The night had settled over the neighborhood like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Lena's car pulled up slowly outside Ethan's apartment complex, the streetlights casting pale, intermittent illumination across the cracked pavement. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she reviewed the mental inventory of everything she knew. The hidden camera, the messages, the footage. Sophie's trembling voice. The weight of grief had fused with a burning need for accountability. She would not leave without answers. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. His expression was easy, almost casual, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lena felt a chill, recognizing immediately the mask he always wore, charm designed to disarm, to manipulate, to conceal menace beneath friendliness. "Lena," he said smoothly, stepping aside to let her in. "I wasn't expecting you." Her jaw tightened, the anger coiling in her chest. "I wasn't expecting to be invited either," she replied evenly, stepping past him into the dimly lit apartment. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, innocuous, domestic, almost normal. Yet Lena sensed immediately that danger lurked beneath the mundane. Every step she took, every object in the apartment, seemed laden with intent. Ethan followed, hands casually tucked into pockets, exuding calm. A predator confident in the subtlety of his power. "I heard about Sophie," he said, voice low, carefully modulated. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly." Lena's stomach churned. His words were polite, measured, almost rehearsed. But beneath them, she detected the faint undercurrent of manipulation, the attempt to frame himself as sympathetic, to control the emotional landscape of their interaction. "I need to know the truth," Lena said, her voice taut. "About Sophie, about you, about everything she went through. I want it all, no lies." She kept her tone steady, carefully measured, though her pulse pounded like a drum. Ethan's smirk widened slightly, though subtle, almost imperceptible. "The truth," he echoed, tilting his head. "Lena, I think the truth is complicated. Sophie was a spirited girl. You know that. Sometimes spirited girls get into situations they can't manage themselves. You have to understand that." Lena's chest tightened with fury. "Spirited? You manipulated her. You coerced her. You forced her into secrecy and fear. Don't pretend you were concerned. I've seen the footage. I've read the messages. I know what you did." Her words hit with precision, leaving no room for ambiguity. Ethan's eyes flickered briefly, a tiny ripple of unease, quickly masked by controlled amusement. "Footage, messages. Lena, you're talking about rumors, whispers. You think you can build a story from shadows and echoes." His tone was calm, but there was a razor edge beneath it. A veiled threat that made Lena's stomach twist. "I don't think." Lena shot back, stepping closer, letting her presence fill the small apartment. "I know." Sophie's fear was real. Her messages were real. The camera footage, your threats, all of it. You preyed on her trust. And I will document every word you speak, every gesture, every attempt to intimidate me. It ends tonight." Ethan leaned back against the counter, a faint smirk returning. But his posture was tense now. Subtle shifts betraying the confidence he tried to project. "Ends tonight. Lena, you think confronting me in my home will end this? You're out of your depth. Be careful, you're angry, yes, but anger alone won't protect you. Sometimes the cost of seeking the truth is greater than we imagine." Lena didn't flinch. "I've already paid the cost. Sophie is gone because of you. And I will see that justice is done. Every manipulation, every threat, every calculated move you made will be documented. I will make sure no one else suffers the way she did." Her hands were steady now, holding her phone and a small notebook, recording the confrontation for evidence. Every word, every inflection, every flicker of Ethan's expression was being catalogued, logged, made permanent. Ethan's gaze narrowed, though he maintained his veneer of control. "You think recording me will help you, Lena? Fear, grief, anger, they cloud judgment. You may believe you're uncovering the full truth, but the truth, it's more elusive than you realize." "I'm not here for your philosophy," Lena said sharply. "I'm here for the facts. And the facts are simple. You manipulated Sophie. You coerced her. You stole her peace of mind. And I will not let it stand unchallenged." For a long moment, silence fell between them, charged, heavy, and almost palpable. Lena could feel Ethan's subtle shifts, his attempts to gauge her emotional state, to intimidate, to project dominance. But she remained calm, grounded in grief yet fueled by purpose. The room seemed to constrict around them, the air tense with unspoken threats and psychological maneuvering. Then, with a sudden motion, Ethan leaned slightly forward, voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't know the full story, Lena. Sophie. She wanted freedom, she made choices. She wasn't just a victim. You're simplifying things, reducing them to blame and punishment. Be careful, stories have layers, and sometimes pulling at one layer unravels more than you expect." Lena's eyes flared with anger. "Do not twist her death. Do not diminish her fear. Do not make excuses for what you did. I will expose everything, Ethan. Every secret, every manipulation. You are not untouchable." She raised her phone slightly, documenting his gestures, the tilt of his head, the flicker in his eyes. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly. For the first time, a shadow of unease passed across his face. "You're relentless," he said, voice lower now, edged with tension. "I'll admit, you have courage. But courage alone isn't protection. Remember that Lena's hands didn't tremble? Courage is irrelevant. What matters is accountability. What matters is Sophie. And you will answer for what you've done." She pressed a button on her phone, ensuring the recording captured everything, every inflection, every pause, every veiled threat. The confrontation stretched on, words and unspoken tension thickening the air. Lena's grief and anger radiated outward, matched by Ethan's careful, almost surgical attempts at psychological intimidation. Each exchange, each subtle maneuver, revealed layers of power dynamics: who controlled the conversation, who held the emotional upper hand, who wielded fear as a weapon. Finally, Lena took a step back, inhaling deeply. She had recorded, questioned, and catalogued enough. The confrontation had revealed Ethan's true nature: charming, manipulative, dangerous, and deliberate. And yet, Lena had remained composed, observing, documenting, and preparing for the next phase. The danger was real, but so was her resolve. Ethan remained near the counter, leaning slightly, watching her carefully. "You think you've uncovered everything, Lena, but some truths are buried deeper. Be cautious. Sometimes digging for answers only reveals more pain than resolution." Lena's gaze met his, unflinching. "Pain already exists. My daughter suffered. I will not allow her fear to be silenced, and I will not allow your manipulation to continue unchecked. I have the evidence, and I will use it." Her voice carried finality, the edge of someone who had crossed the threshold. With that, Lena turned and walked toward the door. Each step was deliberate, measured, a declaration of purpose. The hallway beyond felt surreal, the dim overhead lights casting long shadows that stretched behind her like the echoes of Sophie's presence. Ethan's last words followed her, but they no longer held power. She had witnessed, she had documented, she had confronted Dot as she reached her car. Lena exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain. She had faced him directly, and the recordings, the notebook, and her meticulous documentation would be the armor she needed. Justice would not come easily, but the first confrontation had been survived, and the power dynamics had shifted. She now had tangible evidence, first-hand interactions, and a growing clarity on how to proceed. The night was quiet as she started the engine, shadows crawling across the street. Lena's mind raced, replaying every moment of the confrontation, analyzing every nuance of Ethan's expressions, gestures, and words. He had underestimated her, assumed grief would cloud judgment, assumed fear would paralyze. He had misjudged the depth of her determination. Tonight had been dangerous. Tonight had been pivotal. Lena had entered the den of the predator and emerged with clarity, proof, and the knowledge that the hunt for justice had truly begun. The confrontation had laid bare the psychological terror, the subtle coercion, and the manipulative genius of Ethan, yet it had also revealed Lena's capacity to endure, observe, and act. She drove into the night. The hum of the engine steady, a counterpoint to the chaos of the emotions inside. The confrontation had shifted the balance, made the danger tangible, and provided the first real momentum in the pursuit of truth. Lena knew that the next steps would demand courage, strategy, and vigilance, but she was no longer just a grieving mother. She was an investigator, a chronicler, a force determined to ensure that Sophie's story would be told, and that Ethan would no longer remain untouchable. The night pressed heavily against Lena as she walked the empty streets near Sophie's school, the wind carrying the chill of approaching winter. Streetlights flickered above her, casting harsh, fragmented beams across the pavement. Each shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, echoing the unease in her mind. The confrontation with Ethan had left her shaken, adrenaline still thrumming, but she could not afford to pause. The weight of Sophie's absence, the knowledge of what had been done, and the spectre of Ethan's manipulations pressed her forward, relentless and unyielding. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Lena froze. The message was simple, chilling: "You should stop digging. Or next time, it won't just be fear." Her pulse quickened. Ethan's veiled threats were escalating. The subtle intimidation she had seen in his eyes now spilled into explicit menace. Lena gritted her teeth, fingers tightening around her coat collar. Fear was now tangible, a living entity stalking her steps. Yet it only strengthened her resolve. Inside her apartment felt suffocating. Every corner, every shadow seemed to carry whispers from the past. Sophie's laughter, her anxious glances, the hidden camera silently recording moments of terror. Lena found herself pacing, unable to sit still. She replayed Ethan's words in her mind. "You think you've uncovered everything. Sometimes digging for answers unravels more than you expect." Those words lingered, insidious, a reminder that the path toward truth would come at a high cost. The phone rang. Lena answered, voice taut. "Lena," Maya's tremulous voice came. Through he's escalating. "I got another message on my phone too." "Lena, I think he knows what we've been doing." "I know," Lena said sharply. "We have to document everything, Maya. Every message, every call, every encounter. No detail can be ignored. And we need to go to the police. It's time they understand the scope of what we're facing." Maya's voice shook. "Do you think they'll listen?" "What if they will?" Lena interrupted firmly. "We have recordings, messages, and witnesses, but we have to present it clearly, carefully. Ethan is manipulative. He'll twist the narrative if given the chance. That's why every step must be meticulous." Later, Lena sat in her dimly lit living room, laptop open, notes scattered. Across the coffee table, she meticulously catalogued every message, every recording, every detail from Sophie's journals. The psychological weight of this work was immense. Each entry, each line, each piece of evidence carried the echoes of her daughter's fear and suffering. Lena felt the cost of truth pressing down on her shoulders, a burden that was as emotionally exhausting as it was morally necessary. Her mind drifted to Sophie, the way she had whispered into the hidden camera, trembling, afraid, pleading for someone to understand. Lena's chest tightened. She had witnessed the first shadows of Ethan's control, and now she was tracing them, step by step, into the real world. It was not just grief anymore. It was a hunt, an emotional and moral obligation that consumed her every thought. The next day, Lena went to the local precinct. Detective Harris, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes but a steady demeanor, listened as she presented the evidence. "These are substantial," he said, scanning the recordings and messages. "But you realize, without direct proof of coercion or threat beyond the messages and camera, our hands are somewhat tied. Legal action may be complicated." "I understand," Lena said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. But Sophie was terrified. Ethan's manipulation was subtle, psychological, and ongoing. If we wait for physical proof, it may be too late for others. He's dangerous. We need intervention before more damage is done. Detective Harris nodded slowly. "We'll start with surveillance, witness statements, and digital forensics. But you need to be careful. People who manipulate this way can be dangerous when cornered." Lena left the precinct with a sense of both purpose and urgency. Outside, the streets were slick with recent rain, reflections of neon signs rippling across the wet pavement. Each puddle seemed to mirror her anxiety. Each shadow a reminder of the danger she was stepping into. Lena felt the creeping paranoia every passing car. Every distant figure could be Ethan, watching, waiting, ready to strike. The tension gnawed at her, but she could not let it deter her. Sophie's life, though lost, demanded accountability. Back at home, another message flashed across her phone. Stop before it's too late. Lena's hands trembled, fury and fear colliding. She considered deleting the number, blocking communication, but knew that each message was evidence, a digital fingerprint of the escalating threat. This was not only about grief, it was about strategy, documentation, survival, and justice. That night, Lena drove through the streets Sophie once walked, retracing her daughter's steps, imagining the subtle threats and manipulations that had followed her. The memories were vivid, whispers of intimidation, cryptic text messages, hushed warnings. Lena felt the weight of those moments as if they had been placed on her shoulders, pressing her forward, urging decisive action. She understood now that the truth was never simple. The cost of pursuing it was steep, emotionally and psychologically. Returning home, Lena pored over the footage once more. She watched Sophie's face, the fear and hesitation, the subtle cues of coercion, and the faint hope that someone might intervene. Lena's heart ached, but her resolve hardened. Every tear, every moment of panic caught on camera, was a testament to Ethan's manipulative power and to Sophie's courage in the face of fear. Lena realized that confronting Ethan in person had been only the beginning. Now she had to ensure that law enforcement understood the full scope. Her phone rang again. It was Maya. Lena. Something just happened, she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan. He came by my place. He said he was concerned. I'm scared. Lena's pulse spiked. Stay calm. Lock the doors, stay inside, and do not respond. I'm coming. We'll go to the police, together. This ends tonight, but carefully. Step by step, evidence by evidence. You are not alone. Maya nodded. A shaky exhale audible through the line. Okay, I'll wait for you. Lena left immediately, driving through the city with measured precision. Every streetlight, every parked car, and every shadow dissected by her mind for potential threats. The city at night felt hostile, alive with unseen eyes and subtle dangers. Lena's fear was acute, but it was tethered to purpose. She was no longer merely a grieving mother. She was an active participant in the pursuit of justice, navigating a treacherous psychological landscape laid out by a cunning manipulator. Arriving at Maya's apartment, Lena found her friend trembling but unharmed. They locked the doors and called Detective Harris to report Ethan's escalation. Lena documented every detail. The time of arrival, the phrasing of his threats, the emotional impact on Maya. Each observation, meticulous and thorough, would serve as critical evidence. Lena realized the cost of truth was not theoretical. It demanded vigilance, courage, and the willingness to navigate fear in real time. By the time the officers arrived, Lena and Maya had compiled a detailed report. Detective Harris nodded. Approvingly, you've been thorough. This will strengthen the case, but remember, he's clever. Any misstep, any emotional overreaction could be used against you. Stay sharp, stay cautious, and keep documenting everything. As Lena watched the officers leave with Maya in tow for questioning, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination. The emotional toll of Sophie's death, Ethan's manipulations, and the constant threat of danger weighed heavily. Yet the clarity of purpose sharpened. Lena knew that pursuing justice required enduring psychological strain. Facing fear directly, and navigating a morally complex landscape where emotions and evidence intersected. Later that night, Lena sat in Sophie's room, dim lamplight casting long shadows across the familiar objects. She traced her fingers over Sophie's notebooks, her phone, the hidden camera, all remnants of a life marked by fear, secrecy, and manipulation. The psychological weight of the day pressed down, but Lena's resolve was unbroken. She understood that exposing the full scope of Ethan's manipulations would require patience, courage, and relentless determination. The breaking point had arrived, and she had crossed it. The darkness of the room, the faint hum of the city outside, and the lingering memory of Sophie's whispered fears combined to form a crucible. Lena realized that the pursuit of truth was not only about confronting Ethan, but also about confronting her own grief, paranoia, and moral reckoning. The stakes had never been higher, and somewhere, beyond the walls of the apartment, Ethan watched, aware that his control was slipping. The psychological chess game had escalated, and Lena was no longer merely reactive. She was proactive, documenting, strategizing, and preparing for the confrontation that would finally bring the manipulation into the light. The breaking point had arrived, and Lena was ready to face what came next. The morning was grey, washed in muted light as Lena arrived at the precinct once again. The events of the previous nights still weighed heavily, the adrenaline now replaced by a gnawing exhaustion that tugged at her limbs and mind. Yet, beneath the fatigue, a fierce determination burned. Sophie's recordings had revealed more than just Ethan's manipulations. They hinted at a network of silence, betrayal, and complicity that extended far beyond what Lena had imagined. Detective Harris greeted her, eyes somber but attentive. "Lena, you've done meticulous work," he said, "and the footage messages and witness statements have brought in new leads. But some of the evidence, it points to people we didn't suspect, adults, friends, even teachers. It's worse than we thought." Lena's stomach tightened. She had anticipated uncovering hidden manipulations among Sophie's peers, but adults. The idea gnawed at her, a bitter reminder of how easy it was for the vulnerable to be overlooked. "Show me," she said, voice low, but steady. Boyce gestured to the computer screen. Grainy footage from Sophie's hidden camera played again, this time focusing on moments Lena had initially missed, adults entering the apartment complex, brief but significant conversations with Ethan, subtle exchanges that suggested tacit approval or willful ignorance of Sophie's vulnerability. Lena's eyes narrowed as she watched, recognizing faces of teachers, neighbors, even distant relatives, people Sophie had trusted, people who had silently permitted the manipulation to continue. One clip showed a neighbor, a woman who had often smiled politely at Sophie during walks home, leaning close to Ethan in conversation. The words were unclear, but the body language, nodding. Casual touches on the shoulder, the absence of concern for Sophie's evident anxiety, spoke volumes. Lena's chest tightened. The betrayal was multi-layered, and Sophie's isolation had been compounded by the indifference of those who should have protected her. Harris looked at Lena, reading her expression. "We're approaching something significant." If these adults were aware, even partially, of the coercion Sophie was under, it changes the scope of the investigation, and it may explain why Sophie's pleas for help were never acted upon. Lena swallowed hard. I can't believe this. All the warning signs, and nobody intervened. Not friends, not neighbors, not even the school. Sophie was so alone, her voice broke slightly, a mixture of grief and anger surfacing. She pressed her hands to the desk, grounding herself. The footage and messages were now more than evidence. They were a window into systemic failure. Later that day, Lena met with Maya in a small private room at the precinct. The two women sat across from each other, the air heavy with unspoken grief. Maya's eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I didn't know. I tried to help, Lena. I really did, but I didn't see how deep it went. I didn't know Sophie was." Her voice faltered, and she looked down at her hands. "You weren't alone," Lena said softly, placing a hand over Maya's. "None of us saw the full picture. That's the point. People failed her, adults, friends, anyone who could have intervened, but now we can document it. Now we can confront it." The interview with Maya yielded critical confessions, minor acts of complicity, subtle ignorance, and moments where adults had dismissed Sophie's anxiety as typical teenage drama, Lena felt a painful mixture of sorrow and validation. Sophie's fear had been real, her isolation compounded by those who should have acted. Lena began meticulously cataloguing these revelations, each confession, each missed warning, each piece of evidence layering into a comprehensive narrative. Later, Lena confronted another adult, a teacher who had noticed Sophie withdrawing in class but had chosen not to press for explanations. The man's face was pale, guilt etched into every line. I thought she was just a shy girl, he stammered. I didn't know it was this bad. Ethan seemed harmless. I never suspected he'd do this. Harmless. Lena's voice was a mix of disbelief and quiet fury. Sophie's life was upended because of your inaction. You had a responsibility. Your silence cost her trust, her safety, her peace. Her words hit like small, precise strikes. The teacher lowered his gaze, unable to offer further defense. Lena knew she was uncovering not just perpetrators, but enablers. The moral complexity of human negligence and fear. As Lena compiled the evidence, the emotional weight pressed down on her, but a grim satisfaction emerged. The puzzle pieces were coming together. Sophie's torment was no longer a vague horror in her mind. It was documented, verified, and undeniable. Every recorded whisper, every message, every subtle manipulation was now a weapon in the pursuit of justice. The investigation revealed more than just Ethan's control. It exposed the fragility of trust within Sophie's social world, the dangers of unacknowledged power, and the consequences of ignoring subtle cries for help. Lena realized that justice, while possible, would always be imperfect. Some betrayals could never be undone, some guilt never fully absolved, and some consequences irreversible. Yet, the unveiling of these shadows brought clarity, a moral reckoning that could not be ignored. One evening, Lena and Harris reviewed the final pieces of evidence. These recordings, the confessions, the documented inactions, it's enough. Harris said carefully, enough to press charges against Ethan, and enough to bring scrutiny to those adults who turned a blind eye. But, be aware, the legal process will be messy. People will defend themselves, deny knowledge, and exploit any ambiguity. Lena nodded. I understand, but Sophie deserves this, and no matter how imperfect the justice, it will be a record. A record that she was seen, that her fear mattered, and that accountability will be demanded. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the laptop. This is for her. The revelation of others' involvement added layers of complexity. Lena recognized that evil is rarely isolated. It spreads through complicity, silence, and fear. Every adult who ignored the signs had contributed to Sophie's isolation, and each confession became part of the evidence that would support not only legal accountability, but a moral acknowledgement of her daughter's suffering. That night, Lena returned to Sophie's room, the soft lamplight casting familiar shadows over the objects she once owned. She opened the hidden camera's files once more, watching moments that had previously escaped notice, fleeting glances, hesitant nods, subtle gestures of complicity. The recordings no longer felt like a horror frozen in time. They were testimony, a roadmap for justice. Lena felt a mix of sorrow and resolve. She had walked through Sophie's fear, witnessed manipulation firsthand, and uncovered the web of betrayal that surrounded her daughter. Maya arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of statements and notes she had gathered. I can't believe all of this, she whispered, her voice trembling. All the adults, all the lies, all the warnings we missed. I never imagined. Lena placed a comforting hand on her friend's shoulder. None of us did, but we can't change the past. What we can do is ensure the future is safer for other kids, for Sophie's memory. We have evidence, we have witnesses, we have recordings, and we have the truth. Together, they organized the files, aligning recordings, messages, and witness statements with precision. Each document was a step toward clarity, a testament to Sophie's struggle, and a record of the failures and betrayals that had shadowed her life. Lena knew the path ahead would be grueling, legal challenges inevitable. But for the first time, justice felt within reach. Not perfect, not complete, but tangible. In the quiet aftermath, Lena allowed herself a single moment of reflection. Shadows had been unveiled, not just the manipulations of Ethan, but the blind spots and moral compromises of a world that had failed her daughter. The process had been painful, illuminating, and morally complex. Yet through it all, Lena's resolve had not wavered. Sophie's story would not be silenced, her fear acknowledged, her suffering validated. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the precinct, the shadows lingered. But Lena was no longer paralyzed by them. She had seen them, named them, and documented them. The road to justice was still long, fraught with complexity, but for the first time, Lena could imagine a world where Sophie's torment was met with recognition, accountability, and perhaps, in some small, imperfect way, justice. The courthouse loomed like a cold monolith as Lena approached, each step echoing on the marble stairs. The morning air was sharp, tinged with frost, carrying the faint smell of exhaust and coffee from nearby vendors. She paused at the entrance, inhaling deeply, steeling herself. Today was not just a procedural step, it was a confrontation with a system that often felt indifferent to grief, a system that would measure evidence, testimony, and narrative against the raw, unquantifiable horror of Sophie's experience. Inside, the walls were neutral, sterile, and unyielding. The polished floors reflected the overhead lights, giving the room a clinical, almost unreal glow. Lena's fingers clutched the folder of meticulously compiled evidence recordings, messages, confessions, witness statements, each page. Each digital file, a testament to Sophie's fear and Ethan's manipulations. She knew that the courtroom was not only a place for legal reckoning, but also for psychological exposure. Every word spoken here would reopen wounds, test her resilience, and confront the stark reality of justice's cost. The first witness, Maya, was called. Lena's throat tightened as her best friend stepped up, eyes red but voice steady. The testimony was careful, deliberate. Maya recounted the subtle manipulations, the cryptic messages, and Sophie's growing fear. Each sentence echoing in the silent courtroom. Lena watched as the jurors' expressions shifted: surprise, unease, disbelief. The weight of truth pressed against the formalities of law, demanding acknowledgement even when some wanted to dismiss it. Cross-examination came next. Lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm exterior, sought to cast doubt on every statement. "You claim Ethan manipulated Sophie," she began, voice measured. "But how can you prove coercion without direct evidence? Could this not be adolescent secrecy, a girl's personal struggles, and the natural dynamics of friendship?" Lena's pulse quickened as Maya paused, swallowing hard. Lena wanted to reach across the room, to reassure her friend, but she knew that the courtroom demanded restraint. Every word spoken here was strategic, measured, and consequential. Maya's eyes met Lena's briefly, a silent reassurance, a shared understanding that fear would not silence them. Lena's turn came. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but edged with emotion. Sophie was terrified, she said, each word deliberate. The recordings, the messages, and witness statements show the reality of her fear. This was not adolescent drama. This was manipulation, coercion, and betrayal. And it was allowed to continue because those who should have protected her either ignored or dismissed the warning signs. The judge listened, expression neutral, yet Lena could sense the gravity settling in the room. This was not simply a legal battle, it was a moral confrontation. Each piece of evidence, each testimony, represented a reckoning with societal neglect and personal failure. Lena felt the psychological strain mounting. Grief, anger, and exhaustion converged, but she forced herself to remain composed. Ethan was called to the stand. His demeanor was calm, his voice even, but the subtle smirk that occasionally flickered betrayed a faint tension. "I never coerced Sophie," he stated, smooth and measured. "We were friends. Yes, we had interactions, but nothing you could call manipulation. She was free to make her own choices." Lena's chest tightened. The arrogance, the denial, the calculated charm, it was all there, exactly as she had feared. Yet she also knew that the truth she carried, meticulously documented, would counter his narrative. Every recording, every cryptic message, every observed pattern of coercion would confront this facade of innocence. The cross-examination of Ethan was intense. Lena watched as subtle inconsistencies emerged, a hesitated glance, a carefully worded pause, an unwillingness to address specific interactions. The defense attempted to minimize, to reframe, to divert blame. Yet Lena's meticulously compiled evidence, the web of corroborated testimonies, and the undeniable recordings created cracks in the veneer Ethan tried so desperately to maintain. During recess, Lena sat alone in a quiet corner, reviewing her notes. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the psychological toll of reliving Sophie's fear in every recorded whisper. Every message, every testimony she presented. She thought of the countless nights she had spent alone, reviewing footage, cataloging messages, and confronting adults who had silently allowed manipulation to persist. Each memory was a wound reopened, yet each also fortified her resolve. The afternoon brought a new revelation. A teacher who had once dismissed Sophie's anxiety was called to testify, facing questions Lena had meticulously prepared. The man's voice trembled as he admitted to ignoring subtle signs, rationalizing them as normal teenage behavior. I didn't know the full extent, he confessed, eyes downcast. I thought she was just shy, withdrawn. I didn't see it as fear. I failed her. Lena felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The acknowledgement of failure was not justice in itself, but it was a necessary recognition of the moral cost borne by inaction. Sophie's torment had been compounded not only by Ethan's manipulations, but also by the failures of adults entrusted with her care. The final testimonies of other adults followed, each revealing degrees of ignorance, avoidance, and, in some cases, subtle complicity. Lena documented everything, her mind racing with both grief and clarity. Justice, she realized, was imperfect, layered, and morally complex. It could acknowledge wrongdoing, but it could not undo the past. Yet the exposure of these shadows, the unveiling of hidden betrayals, created the possibility of accountability, flawed, but significant. When the courtroom session adjourned for the day, Lena stepped outside into the cold air. The frost clung to her coat, and the streets glimmered faintly under the streetlights. She inhaled deeply, the tension of the day pressing against her chest. The psychological cost of confronting the full scope of Sophie's experience leaving her raw and trembling. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a fragile sense of progress emerged. The truth was out, documented, and now in the hands of those who could act. That evening, Lena returned to Sophie's room, the lamplight casting long familiar shadows over the objects of her daughter's life. She touched the notebooks, the camera, the small trinkets Sophie had left behind. The room was quiet, yet it carried the echoes of fear, courage, and resilience. Lena realized that justice, while imperfect, was possible. The legal proceedings could never erase grief or fully punish betrayal, but they could create a record, a testament to Sophie's experience and a warning to those who might exploit vulnerability in the future. Lena's reflection was interrupted by a call from Detective Harris. "Lena," he said, voice careful, but firm. "The evidence has been reviewed, and the court is proceeding. Ethan's manipulations, combined with the inaction of certain adults, will be considered. But remember, this will be slow, messy, and emotionally taxing. Prepare yourself." "I understand," Lena replied. "But it must be done. Sophie deserves that, and I will see it through, no matter the cost." Later, as Lena lay in bed, exhaustion overwhelming her, the psychological toll of the day weighed heavily. She thought of Sophie's last moments, her whispered fears, and the courage required to endure manipulation. The cost of truth was steep. Grief revisited, memories relived, and the unrelenting emotional burden of confronting betrayal. Yet Lena also felt a spark of hope. Exposing the shadows, documenting manipulation, and facing the system head-on were steps toward accountability. The next morning, court reconvened. Lena sat, eyes focused, as final testimonies were heard. Emotional confessions, corroborated evidence, and the stark reality of Sophie's experience converged into a narrative that could no longer be ignored. Ethan's manipulations were laid bare, the network of ignored warning signs illuminated, and the moral complexities of human negligence documented. Lena felt the weight of each revelation, sorrow, anger, grief, yet beneath it, a fragile sense of justice taking shape. After hours of testimony, the judge adjourned the session, leaving Lena with a sense of both accomplishment and exhaustion. Justice had been pursued, shadows unveiled, and the cost of truth fully realized. Yet she knew that the emotional and psychological toll would linger. Grief would remain, memories would persist, and the imperfection of accountability would always be evident. But the steps taken, documentation, confrontation, and legal pursuit, had created a space for recognition, a testament to Sophie's life and courage. As Lena walked through the courthouse doors into the fading light of afternoon, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The cost of justice was heavy, emotionally, psychologically, and morally. But it was necessary. Sophie's story had been told, the shadows unveiled, and the path toward accountability, however imperfect, had been carved. Lena knew the journey was far from over, but she also knew that she had done everything within her power to honor her daughter's memory and confront the darkness that had shaped her final months. And in the quiet moments that followed, Lena allowed herself to imagine Sophie's presence, a silent affirmation of courage, resilience, and the enduring impact of truth. The cost of justice had been immense, but so too had the strength it revealed, and Lena understood that while wounds would remain, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing and the pursuit of accountability could shine a light into even the darkest shadows. The morning air was heavy with quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves along the sidewalk. Lena walked slowly, her hands in the pockets of her coat, carrying the weight of months that had passed since Sophie's death. The legal battles, the confessions, the courtroom confrontations, all of it had taken its toll, leaving traces in the lines of her face, in the heaviness of her steps. Yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a fragile sense of resolution. The shadows had been unveiled, the web of betrayal exposed. Justice, imperfect but tangible, had begun to assert itself. Lena entered Sophie's room, now stripped of the heavy tension that had once defined it. The hidden camera, once a source of terror, sat in a small box on the desk, ready to be handed over to authorities. Its lens, a silent witness to Sophie's fear, now symbolized accountability rather than oppression. Lena traced her fingers over the familiar objects in the room, a worn diary, photographs taped to the wall, the scattered remnants of a life lived in the quiet grip of adolescence. Each item carried memory, grief, and love, reminders of the girl she had lost, and the courage she had left behind. She placed the camera carefully in the box, taking a deep breath. "This is for you, Sophie," she whispered. "For everyone who didn't see, who didn't hear, your truth will be preserved." The act was simple, almost ritualistic, yet heavy with meaning. The evidence of manipulation, fear, and betrayal would now exist beyond her own memory, a permanent record of Sophie's experience and the moral reckoning it demanded. Later, Lena visited the small park where Sophie had often spent afternoons with friends. The winter sun was pale, casting elongated shadows across the frost-dusted grass. Lena knelt, digging carefully to plant a small memorial, a slender tree with delicate branches, wrapped with a simple ribbon in Sophie's favorite color. She placed a small plaque at the base, etched with Sophie's name and a brief tribute, for courage, for love, for memory. As she worked, memories rose unbidden. Sophie's laughter echoing through the apartment, the way she would anxiously twist her hair when nervous, the fleeting moments of joy that had made the darkness bearable. Lena felt the familiar ache of grief, but also the delicate thread of connection that persisted beyond death. The memorial, small and unassuming, became a focal point for remembrance, a physical manifestation of both sorrow and resilience. Maya arrived quietly, carrying a bouquet of winter flowers. She knelt beside Lena, placing them gently at the base of the tree. She would have loved this, Maya said softly, her voice trembling. Even with everything that happened, she would have wanted beauty in the memory. Yes, Lena replied, eyes glistening. And we'll make sure others know. We'll share what we learned, what we endured. Sophie's story won't be forgotten, and maybe it can protect someone else. Her words were quiet, yet deliberate. The drive to prevent further harm had become a new mission, a way to channel grief into something constructive, something that honored Sophie's life rather than being consumed by her absence. The day faded into late afternoon, the sky a muted wash of grey and orange. Lena walked home slowly, her thoughts heavy yet strangely unburdened. She reflected on the months that had passed, the first discovery of the hidden camera, the recordings, Ethan's manipulation, the court proceedings, and the confessions from adults who had failed. Each step had exacted a toll, reshaping her understanding of trust, innocence, and the fragility of human vigilance. Yet through it all, there had been clarity. The recognition that truth, though painful, must be preserved at home. Lena placed the small items Sophie had left behind into carefully labeled boxes. Photographs, journals, and personal trinkets were stored with reverence, each piece catalogued for both memory and evidence. The act of organizing these remnants felt cathartic, a final attempt to impose order on a life that had been disrupted by fear and betrayal. Lena paused at the desk, staring at the box containing the hidden camera. Its lens reflected the dim light of the room, cold and unblinking. She imagined Sophie's voice, faint but present, whispering through the memory of those recordings. The horror of those moments remained. Yet the knowledge that they would now serve as both testimony and protection offered a strange solace. At evening arrived, and Lena lit a single candle on the windowsill. The flickering flame cast moving shadows across the walls, dancing over photographs of Sophie and small objects that carried her memory. Lena sat quietly, allowing herself to feel the grief fully, acknowledging the weight of months lived under fear and uncertainty. The candlelight reflected in her eyes, mingling sorrow with resolve. The phone rang. It was Detective Harris. "Lena," he said, voice measured. "The evidence has been formally filed. Ethan's prosecution will proceed, and the authorities, reviewing the adult's complicity, have confirmed further investigation. Your diligence has ensured that nothing is overlooked." Lena exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just hope it's enough." "Enough to honor Sophie," Harris replied, "and enough to prevent this from happening again. But Lena, take care of yourself. The cost of seeing this through is high. Don't let it consume you completely." After the call, Lena closed her eyes, remembering Sophie's last whispers captured in the hidden camera. Fear, uncertainty, and a desperate hope for someone to notice. She understood that no act of justice could erase trauma or grief. Some wounds would always remain, subtle and unyielding. Yet the pursuit of truth had offered a form of closure, imperfect but significant. It had transformed fear into testimony, sorrow into advocacy, and grief into a quiet strength. That night, Lena placed a small blanket over the memorial tree in the park, shielding it from frost. She whispered a final message to Sophie. "You are remembered, you are loved, and your truth will protect others." The act was private, intimate, and unrepeatable. A symbolic closure marking the end of one chapter while acknowledging the continued presence of memory, loss, and vigilance. Days passed, and life resumed in fragments. Lena continued to advocate quietly, sharing her experience with support networks and agencies working with at-risk youth. She carried Sophie's memory as both a shield and a guide, translating grief into action, darkness into awareness. Each step was measured, deliberate, and suffused with remembrance. Yet, even in the moments of seeming peace, shadows lingered. Lena sometimes caught herself scanning rooms, recalling subtle signs she had once missed, reflecting on moments when silence had allowed harm to persist. The unease was not fear alone. It was awareness, a recognition that evil often hides in plain sight and that vigilance is perpetual. Sophie's life had been cut short, but her memory had become a beacon, fragile, luminous, and enduring in its testimony. At the end of the month, Lena returned once more to the memorial tree. Snow had fallen, coating the branches in white. She placed another small ribbon around its trunk, etched with a brief message, "Never forgotten." The act was simple but powerful. It was not closure in the sense of forgetting or moving on entirely. It was closure in recognition, a conscious acknowledgement of grief, loss, and the ongoing responsibility of memory. In the quiet of the winter evening, Lena sat on the bench nearby, watching the soft snowfall. The city around her continued, its relentless pace, indifferent to sorrow and history. But Lena knew that within the folds of memory, truth had been preserved. Sophie's story, her fear, her courage, and the betrayals she endured were now recorded, acknowledged, and honored. The hidden camera's footage, once a symbol of terror and violation, had been entrusted to authorities, a physical representation of justice and remembrance. Lena understood that the pursuit of accountability had come at great cost: grief, exhaustion, moral reckoning, and psychological strain. Yet the process had been necessary. Sophie's voice, captured in whispers and screams, would now continue to speak, ensuring that those who failed could not be forgotten. And that vigilance remained as night deepened. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the lingering presence of Sophie in the quiet room. The shadows, though still faintly threatening, were now illuminated by the record of truth, memory, and action. Justice had been imperfect, painful, and costly, but it had been pursued. And in that pursuit, Lena discovered a fragile peace, one threaded with sorrow, remembrance, and the enduring impact of a life too short, yet indelibly recorded in memory.